So this video is restricted only to the preparation of UPSC, and the video will be as precise as it could have been for the relevant exam. And it is also expected that you are having certain background about the subject called Indian polity. If even if you're a new student, just in case if you're a new student, you need to download the PDF, you need to revise it before going through the lectures, or at the end, after completing this entire series, you need to revise the series again so as to have better clarity by then. So what this Indian polity is? So Indian polity, first let's just take some negative definitions. Indian polity does not is not equal to the political science, as we also study in political science we do study about the various political thinkers. Now this Indian polity is not also equals the Constitution of India as a law paper, as because we in Constitution of India as a law paper we do study the various rules to give interpretation to various provisions of the Constitution. So now the question, what this Indian polity really is. So this Indian polity is the daily drama being enacted on the stage of Indian Constitution. This the polity, the Indian polity is the daily drama being enacted on the stage of the Indian Constitution. So to understand this daily drama, which is being staged on the Indian Constitution, we'll take one of the political dramas which just recently got unfolded the last year, Karnataka state election. Now, before Karnataka's state election started, there were certain issues which were doing rounds, like for example, the Lingayat community. The Lingayat community was in news because it was asking for separate religion status. Now please pay attention here. Here one thing we need to keep in mind is the subtextual question. Now this Lingayat community was asking for special religious status. Now the subtextual question which one may ask, which is the authority, center or state, which can grant this separate religious status? Okay, now let's take another issue which was in news in Karnataka regarding the state flag. Now Karnataka was looking for its own state flag. Now the question, who has the authority, either the center or the state, to provide for a separate state flag? Where is it mentioned? If it is mentioned, then what are the provisions mentioned for it? So this is the subtextual question which ought to ask. Now let's take another case and the corresponding subtextual question. Kaveri water, again in Karnataka. Supreme Court issued a notice to the central government to notify a scheme to distribute the water. But when center failed, Supreme Court called the Attorney General. Attorney General is the legal representative of the central government for the contempt of court. Now the subtextual question here is the Supreme Court, which is the judiciary, can it hold the Attorney General, who is the representative of the government being executive, accountable? So basically the subtextual question is, can the Supreme Court, the judiciary, hold the executive accountable for its contempt? Now these are the subtextual questions, and it is these subtextual questions which constitute the Indian polity. Okay, now on the day of the Karnataka election, the role of the Election Commission of India became very important. Now the question, what is the role of the Election Commission of India? Who has provided for Election Commission of India? So if we look into the Indian Constitution, that Election Commission of India is mentioned under the Article 324 in the Indian Constitution, and it is the Constitution which has established Election Commission of India and empowered Election Commission of India to conduct the election. So we saw the daily drama, and we are now looking at the various entities in this political drama which are established and empowered by the Indian Constitution. So after the election, the governor called the leader of the single largest party, which was BJP in that case. But when BJP called the leader of the single largest party, which was Yadurappa, the opposition went to Supreme Court challenging his eligibility. Supreme Court said he is eligible, and Supreme Court for asked Yedurappa to prove his majority within 48 hours. Now the question here, that it was it was a drama which was taking place, political drama which was being enacted in the legislature, but the members of the legislature went to the judiciary, and that judiciary, the Supreme Court, is directing the governor so as to conduct. In case of Yadurappa, he was asked to prove his majority within 48 hours, whereas governor had given Yadurappa 14 days. Now the question: what is the role between Supreme Court and the governor? Can the Supreme Court can the Supreme Court direct the governor? So to test this majority, the pro tem speaker was elected, was appointed. The pro tem speaker is appointed. So the pro tem speaker is appointed by the governor. Again, the opposition even again rushed to the Supreme Court, suggesting that Bopaiah is biased towards BJP. Now the question here, the subtextual question here, is what is the relation between legislature and judiciary? Can the judiciary direct legislature? Now, at the end of this, here what the judiciary is trying to do is that the judiciary is trying to control the legislature. So all we can see that it is the constitution which has established the judiciary, which has established the legislature, which has provided for the president, which has also provided for the Election Commission of India and the various bodies. So these various characters are provided for by the constitution. They are empowered by the constitution, and it is the constitution which limits the power through the creation of the other bodies. So these subtextual questions which comprise the polity are taking place among the characters which are established and empowered by the constitution. Hence, Indian polity, getting back to the definition again, Indian polity is the daily drama which is being enacted on the stage of the Indian Constitution. All right. Now, what can be the source? What can be the source to understand the polity? So, to understand the polity better, the best source is the newspaper, because polity is an everyday changing subject. Now, how to read the newspaper is the question. Now, recently, Supreme Court, there was this starvation death in Orissa, and Supreme Court had ordered center to immediately release food grains. Now, this starvation death is taking place. This was the news. Now, the question is: the starvation death is taking place in Orissa. Why Supreme Court is asking the government, the center, to release the food grains, and why not the Orissa High Court? So the answer lies that under Article 21, food right to food is a fundamental right, which has been inferred under the right to life of the Article 21 by the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court under Article 32, being the guarantor of the fundamental rights, is asking the center to release the food grains. So whenever there is something in news, we ought to search for the provisions because of which those things are in news. So this is how the newspaper should be covered. Now let's try and now we are going to try to trace the origin of the constitution. So what we'll do is we'll try to understand the origin of the constitutional form of governance in India. So this origin of the constitutional form of governance in India can be traced back to our freedom struggle. where we had a belief, where irrespective of our diversity, we had a belief that we could be governed by a common faith. And that common faith is not the religion. That common faith is the faith that we can be governed by a single document, and that document is constitution. So this common faith gave birth to Constituent Assembly, and this Constituent Assembly had 299 members. These 299 members these 299 members, this common faith led to a representative body which is known as the Constituent Assembly, which had 299 members, and these 299 members, they signified the aspirations which we had accommodated. So these 299 members, they represented the various aspirations, and this Constituent Assembly discussed, deliberated, and drafted and gave to ourselves the Indian Constitution. And this marked the beginning of the constitutional governance. And the story of the constitutional governance begins with the first article, which says that India, that is Bharat, shall be a union of states. So this Article 1 establishes India as a nation state, which is also called as Bharat. So here in this and the next lecture, we'll be discussing the power of this state. So let's just quickly revise of what we have studied so far. That Indian subcontinent, including Pakistan and Bangladesh, has been a crucible, a melting point of various civilizations. Various civilizations have felt that have left their cultural mark on it. In this diversity arose an illustration of unity, which is India, that is Bharat. We, the people, shared a common faith that we could organize and govern ourselves on the basis of a common single constitution, and this was constitutionalism at work. The common faith that we could be governed by a single document was constitution, was constitutionalism at work. The faith that we, irrespective of our diversity, could be governed by a single document called constitution is constitutionalism at work. This constitutionalism led to the establishment of a representative body, this which was the Constituent Assembly, and according to and Article 1, Clause 1 states that India, that is Bharat, shall be a union of states. Now the next thing that we are going to discuss is the power of this very state. Now the constitution will never give the entire state power in the hands of one institution. So the constitution will so the next thing that we are going to understand is the separation of power. Separation of power between legislature, judiciary, and executive. Now the very important question is that who created this state called India? So this state was created by the sovereign, we the sovereign. So it is us who created this sovereign, this state called India or Bharat. Now who gave power to this state? It is us, the ultimate sovereign. Now why did we create this state? We created this state for ensuring our own welfare. Now the question, this powerful entity called state, if it is so powerful, what if it goes against us? Is there any mechanism so as to ensure that this does not happen? So for this we have separation of power. Now to understand this, let's take example. Let's just say that there's a traffic officer standing at the signal, and he has nabbed a person who hasn't breached the traffic signal. And let's just say that this traffic officer takes that person to the office of court, and there he gets across to the judicial table and puts on the gown and ask the person of his crime. So the so any hope of that person having got justice ends before it begins. Because the judicial power, it happens because the judicial power and the policing power, if that would have been the case, the judicial power and the policing power would have been accumulated in one hand, which would have made the police a totalitarian like Hitler. Now, let's take another example. Arun Jaitley, late Arun Jaitley, the former finance minister of the previous government, which imposed GST. Now, the question: could he have imposed GST on his own? No. As being the member of the Council of Ministers and being a temporary executive, at best he can propose such policy. This policy will then be taken to the parliament. Parliament here is the legislature. This legislature is the parliament which will see later. So it is this legislature which gives permission by making law to this policy, and that permission is given in the form of legislation. Legislation means to establish by law. So when this policy is legislated and there's a legislation regarding it, then for any breach of such legal sanction, for such legislation, legal sanctions can be imposed. So to legislate means to establish. So what we can see, that the policy was proposed by, we are trying to understand the separation of power. So here this GST bill was proposed by a member of COM, Council of Ministers. So basically it was proposed by executive. It is passed by the legislature, and it will be imposed on the field by the permanent executives like the tax officer, sell tax officer, income tax officer, excise officers. Suppose that while paying GST, we get with some kind of dispute. So that dispute will be adjudicated by Supreme Court, which will interpret the law and based on its interpretation will decide the dispute. So what we are trying to understand, that the policy was proposed by the executive, it was converted into legislation and was provided legal sanctity by the legislator, and in case of violation of such legislation or any dispute arising out of it is being decided by the judiciary. So this is called separation of power. Here, had the power been given in one hand, whereas the executive would have been given where the Council of Ministers would have been given the power to execute the GST and to legislate the GST and to decide on the violation of the GST, then it could have become completely totalitarian. So we'll look at this separation of power. So this is where the separation of power provides for checks and balances. We'll understand this further. Now what we'll do, we'll take the three wings, namely legislature, judiciary and executive. We'll take them two at a time and try and understand the separation of power between them.